Greetings, programs. Welcome to episode 11, Abortion Round 2. So, my last vid got some thumbs up and some criticism as unconvincing, and that's fair. I read the article a couple of times before and thought it was useful, but I had not actually registered the language until I read it out aloud. Turns out I internally auto-edit as I read. Who knew? So this one is not a reading. This is me articulating my position based on ethics. Because like I said, most of what I accept is in line with the article, so there will be some overlap, but here I shall be trying to address some specific issues that have come up in online debates about this stuff. But first, some groundwork. While I do not accept that a fetus is human in the same way as an aware adult or a child, or that they should therefore have the same human rights, that leads us to going down a rabbit hole arguing about what is life really. And a rigorous definition of any form of life has yet to be nailed down by science. Seriously, is a virus alive as a bacteria? Yeah, it's tricky. Because biology does not have hard lines that make it easy to do that sort of stuff. So I grant it quickly. Fetuses have the same rights as full, unarguable adults. Secondly, human rights must be given evenly. You cannot deny somebody the rights that others have. That's called discrimination, and we recognise that as wrong. See segregation for details. And thirdly, we are discussing the fact of abortion. Not what a person should do to avoid getting into the situation or how things could have been done differently if the world was different. There are pregnant people who exist. They wish not to be pregnant. No ability to rewind time exists, however much we may wish it did. So on with the show. So the main thrust of my argument is one that has been proposed by other people in the past, philosophers and such, smarter people than me, and that is that no human has the right to life at the expense of another. And all allegories and thought experiments are aimed at demonstrating that we already accept this principle in other areas and thus should do so here. And if an interlocutor avoids these thought experiments, they are tacitly admitting defeat. Because if they were on firm ethical footing, they could just use their ethical model to process examples, and they don't. So the central thesis still is, no human has a right to life at another's expense. Well, why? Well, because we already recognize this in most Western countries. It varies from place to place, but in the US, where this is a particular issue, you are not required to risk yourself or cost yourself to save the life of another person, full human or no. If a person is drowning in a river, you can be a hero and save them, but you are not required to, ethically or legally. You might be scared, or you might be a bad swimmer. It doesn't matter. You are not required, and thus not forced to do so. If a person may die if you don't shelter them from the weather, a good person may shelter them, but you are not required to do so, and thus not forced to do so. These are, I'm told, libertarian ideals. And a woman, providing her body for the use of a fetus, falls in line with this. It's great if she does, but she is not required and therefore not forced to do so. So she can withdraw her consent for the fetus to be inside her, and now it is violating her bodily autonomy. Same as well, a woman tells you to stop while you're having sex. If you don't stop, you are violating her. And just like with sex, just because you have been given permission in the past, there is no obligation on someone to continue with that permission. Or to use an example every Western person knows, just because mum said you can have a biscuit, does not mean you're allowed as many biscuits as you like at any point in the future. It won't hold up if Nana asks and you tell her mum said it was okay 2 weeks ago, and you've had 10 bickies since then. But wait, doesn't that autonomy thing go both ways? Doesn't the fetus have the right to bodily autonomy? Well, no, it's not a person. But for this argument, we'll grant it. Yes, it's a person. So, okay, the person has a right to bodily autonomy, and so does the woman. Well, these rights are in conflict. Therefore, we must resolve that conflict. And given that we lack a magical third option, we must either overrule the fetus's granted right to bodily autonomy, or the woman's. There are no third options currently available. So, if we side with the woman and respect her bodily autonomy, the fetus must leave. It cannot, and therefore must be removed. With current tech, this means that the fetus is guaranteed to die. And if we did manage to get it out intact, this death could take some time, which would be cruel if the fetus could feel anything, which it cannot. This lack of feeling is why in most countries abortions cannot be performed after a given point to avoid causing suffering to the fetus. Given that the fetus is therefore guaranteed to die, it is therefore medically ethical to remove the fetus in such a way as to cause the minimum possible harm to the woman, which is why the current techniques destroy the fetus as part of the procedure, given that we do not have access to Star Trek style beaming technology. This is where all that emotive hacked apart language comes from. Yes, it's gross and horrible, we get it. That's life. Life is gross and horrible. There is no joy in this story. Okay, so if we side with the fetus, then what? Well, we have a worse problem. We have just endorsed slavery. What? No, that's hyperbole. No, it ain't. When you force another person to perform some labour against their will, that's slavery, even if you don't actually have the legal fiction of owning them. When you use the power of the law to force a person to sustain another with their own body, to risk permanent harm or changes to their body or even death, that's slavery. And yes, death, it does happen even in the West. The US loses one would-be mother for every 3,500 births. 300,000 women worldwide per year. Compare those odds to winning the lottery. See footnote number 1, maternal death. So no, just putting the baby up for adoption after birth is not a fix for this. Worse, by undercutting bodily autonomy like that, you just open the way for some truly horrific things that you only see in dystopian sci-fi books. If your bodily autonomy does not trump the right to life of another person, consider what happens if somebody needs a transplant to live and you are the only tissue match. Kidney, a lung, piece of your liver, a chunk of your pancreas, a section of bowel, or even a chunk of your bone marrow. Consider for a moment that there are some very rich and very powerful people in the world, and they want to live longer and have the millions and billions to make it stick. Do you want to open that door? So, we are okay with murdering a child? The emotive language here helps nobody. We are not murdering a child. A child is what you get after it is born, and this is a clear attempt to win an argument using emotion. And while an abortion can be a responsible act, and one that women can be at peace with, nobody here is happy about this situation. So are we okay killing a potential human then? Yes, because the alternative is horror. The alternative is slavery. This is why there is no pro-abortion side. This is an intensely personal choice that only a woman can make with regard to her body and her future. The partner gets a say, but it's her that pays a price, so she gets the final say. And we are not killing a baby. We are not killing a thinking, feeling being. We are stopping that from happening. In the same way that birth control controls birth by various methods that prevent birth, so does an abortion. The identity of indiscernibles is a rule in mathematics or logic that states that if there's no way to discern the difference between two objects, they must be considered as identical. With birth control or contraceptives, you start with a woman that is not pregnant, there is no birth, no baby, and no baby suffers. With an abortion, you originally start with a woman that is not pregnant, becomes so, there is no birth, there is no baby, and no baby suffers. The starting conditions are the same, the ending conditions are the same. From the outside, the conditions are identical. This is why abortions are legal in most places, only to a point. After that point, the fetus can suffer, and thus may not be harmed. You cannot apply suffering to that which cannot suffer. But wait, does that then mean it's okay to kill people on life support who are in a coma because they can't suffer? Yes, it does mean that. That's why the next of kin has the right to remove somebody from life support. That's what next of kin means. Only family, or your nearest best match, can make that choice for you because you trust them with that. When it becomes obvious that the person is never going to be recovering, then the plug can be pulled and their life signs allowed to stop or be terminated. Is this killing? Yes. But it is justified killing. There is no detectable difference between life and death for the person, and the same goes for the fetus. And while the pro-choice side does bring out emotions from time to time, most of their arguments are not emotive. Bodily autonomy, women's health, consequences to women around the world if it's taken away. It is telling that the pro-forced birth side, pro-life no way, seems to have nothing but emotion on their side, screaming murder and showing pictures of dismembered fetuses. Yeah, it sucks, we know. But where's the argument? They don't seem to have anything beyond murder is bad and you are a murderer. And so often they try to bring God into it. Sorry, but if you bring God into it, you are disqualified until such time as God shows up and tells us that you are right about them and what God says. And we already do not treat a fetus as a full person. Not legally and not on a human level. This can easily be demonstrated with the old thought experiment. You are given a choice of either saving a living 2-year-old child or a canister containing 1,000 stored embryos from some kind of disaster. Think about that for a moment. Doesn't matter how it actually works, you have a choice. You can rescue either a 2-year-old child or a canister of 1,000 stored embryos. All viable, good to go. Don't try to weasel out of it, think about it. Which choice would you make? I can pretty much guarantee that 99% of people would save the 2-year-old child. Because however you rationalize it, you do not see 1,000 embryos as human. And the child is. Also, the child can suffer. A bunch of frozen embryos cannot. And worse still, something that the pro-choice side of things has been saying for years, the pro-forced birth side does not seem to put their money where their mouth is. If a fertilized egg is considered a human being, then what steps should be taken to ensure that those human beings would be protected? The moment after intercourse, would women be prohibited from any behavior that would possibly prevent the egg from attaching to the uterine wall, like jogging or having more sex? Could people charge her with attempted murder for having a smoke or taking a drink? No. Why not? Because the life begins at conception stance is not well thought out. It's almost entirely based on emotion. Now, emotion isn't worthless, but it's also not logic, and it's not reason, and it sure as hell ain't ethics. And if you can't argue with logic, you really don't have an argument. And by resorting to emotion, you give that away. Because sex happens. Even in countries where doing so carries a death penalty, it still happens. And sometimes, even with sensible precautions, pregnancies happen. And abortions happen, even in countries that carry the death penalty for everybody involved. It still happens. All that happens when you ban this, or if you try to ban this, is that more women get hurt when they get desperate. Here is a quote from a thread that I encountered that sums it up quite nicely, I think. I maintain that if these folks believe as they do, they should be out there advocating for new laws that require organ donorship, forced placements of orphans with rich families that can afford it, mandatory reversible sterilization for men, and other removals of personal autonomy in favor of the greatest good for the greatest number of humans. They don't, because their position has nothing at all to do with helping babies, and everything to do with punishing women. And I happen to agree. There's all these folks are saying, abortion is murder. You shouldn't be allowed. You should have to go through with it, and it's your own stupid fault for getting pregnant. But these punishments, these effects, these penalties only seem to ever apply to women, don't they? So why aren't we advocating for forced reversible sterilization of all men? That's right. Sterilize everybody, reversibly, and all you need to do is fill out a bit of paperwork and get a quick trip to the doctor. You don't need approval or anything, you just have to go to the hassle. And then you can start a family all planned and careful. Because you wouldn't want to put somebody in a situation where they have to murder a child, would you? But oddly enough, as soon as the cost starts to come down on the male side of things, all the agreement seems to disappear. And I'm saying that as somebody who has those sorts of parts. Frankly, if the state was willing to pay for semi-permanent reversible sterilization, I'd be all for it. Quick trip to the doctor, bit of discomfort for a few days, maybe staying away from activities for a little while, and no risk for you. But more importantly, no risk for her and no murdered babies. Strange. I don't think people are going to go for that for some reason. Could it be hypocrisy? So, in the end, we stand on bodily autonomy, because that is the fundamental right that trumps all others. Yes, even the right to life. Because the alternative is not freedom, it is horror. Right, that's all for today. Bit of a quicker one, and yes, I am slightly irritated. Been slugging this out for a little while online, which, though annoying, was good in that it enabled me to put my thoughts in order and really grind away at what really mattered, what was the important part of any possible argument. Now, for the last couple of weeks, I've said tune in next week for blah. And it's either been a collab with Diana, if she's free, or epistemology, or something else. And pretty much over the last 2 or 3 weeks, it's all cocked up. So tune in next week for I don't know what, but I'll tell you when I get there. Bye for now.